I'd also like to introduce Lori Matthew.
So Ray, thank you very much. My name is Lori Matthew. I'm the Section Chief, Public Health Section Chief, overseeing the drinking water section at the State Department of Public Health. And I welcome all of you, and there's just about 100 of you on the call, which is wonderful, on the webinar. I welcome you on behalf of the Commissioner of the Department of Public Health, Renee Coleman-Mitchell, along with Deputy Commissioners Janet Bransford and Heather Aaron at the Department of Public Health. I'm here to speak to you for a little bit about the agenda, and our agenda will cover a number of topics, and we'll get into a lot of the science about PFAS and PFOA. We'll talk about health effects. We'll talk about what we're doing in the state of Connecticut and what others are doing around us. But we're going to get into an introduction first of the roles and responsibilities of the Department of Public Health and DEP programs. We'll talk about an overview for PFAS. We'll talk about the challenges, and there's quite a few challenges to go through, and the PFAS situation in Connecticut. And then we'll end with the Governor Lamont's task force and a discussion about timing and how we're moving forward. So to start, the roles and responsibilities of the Department of Public Health and Energy and Environmental Protection. And I want to say one thing to our colleagues in the room here. There's a number of colleagues, there's people from staff from the Department of Public Health and Energy and Environmental Protection, and we're working together on this effort. And both commissioners, Katie Dykes and Renee Coleman-Mitchell, are the co-chairs of the task force under the governor. And have a very good collaborative effort moving forward. So first, the Department of Public Health. We are healthy people and healthy Connecticut communities. There are 3 sections within the Department of Public Health that are working closely on this PFAS issue. There's public drinking water. There's our state health laboratory and our environmental health section. For the public drinking water, we are responsible for the primacy of the Safe Drinking Water Act and implement the Safe Drinking Water Act through and with the EPA, the Environmental Protection Agency. We are the regulatory authority for Connecticut's over 2,500 public water systems that serve 2.8 million people. Most of those public water systems are small public water systems, so we'll get into a breakdown in a bit. We have authority over a whole host of proactive public health laws that go back well over 100 years, and that we oversee the high quality sources of water that protect human health for human consumption. Our laboratory provides drinking water analysis and currently is exclusive of PFAS substances. The environmental health section provides health assessment, toxicology reviews, and public messaging, provides education and outreach for residents, and has a lot of that information up on our webpage. And as you can see on the sidebar, we work closely in partnership with our local health districts and departments, which there are about 70, there's over 70 of those in the state of Connecticut. So the Drinking Water section has the primacy of the Safe Drinking Water Act. And the Safe Drinking Water Act is a set of complicated rules. There's 17 distinct rules, and since the 1970s, the department has primacy and oversees the public water systems that are mandated to comply with all of these rules under the Safe Drinking Water Act. There's also a rule known as the Unregulated Contaminant Monitoring Rule. And we're on right now in the midst of the 4th round of that rule that studies up and coming contaminants, and PFAS was under the 3rd version of that rule. We'll talk a little bit more about that. And another big part of what we do within the drinking water section is receiving and analyzing from the water companies over 500,000 water quality samples for human consumption every single year, which in compliance with those 17 rules under the Safe Drinking Water Act. We regulate over 2,500 public water systems, and it's a variety of systems. 82 of those are large that serve over 1,000 people. There are 500 community public water systems. There are essentially 2,000 non-community systems, and non-community can be schools and daycares. That's where people do not reside. And many of those are transient non-community systems, which many of those are small businesses. We have authority over the proactive laws. We oversee water supply planning, individual water supply plans for systems that serve over 1,000 people, have been done for over 30 years. We oversee a regional planning process as well as regulate over 100,000 acres of land that's owned by water companies. This map shows, and I'll just do a brief description of what this map is. In the blue area are the service areas for our community public water systems in our state. As you can tell, the service areas are not everywhere in our state. You can see the 169 towns designated and shown. You see a lot of the wells, the little dots that are the orange color denote a public water supply well. And there's quite a bit of the wells that are spread out through the state of Connecticut. Also in the lighter green areas, you can kind of see those. In the lighter green areas, there's over 150 reservoir systems. And the lighter green shows where those reservoir watersheds are, and that covers 17% of our state.
So this is Brian Toll. I'm the acting chief of the Environmental Health Section. So just quickly, the Environmental Health Section has two programs that could be involved with PFAS. Our toxicology section performs risk assessments, gets involved with standard setting with DEP, and gets involved with setting action levels, health guidance levels for private wells and fish and other things that might be impacted by PFAS. Our private well program oversees the rest of that map that you were just looking at that isn't covered by public water, 325,000 private wells. It's a very small group. We primarily conduct outreach and education to encourage testing for contaminants that are called for. And more importantly, maybe for most people, is guidance on treatment technology. Relative to the PFAS situation, the private well program could also be involved in helping to coordinate, collaborate on sampling that might occur around contaminated sites with DEP and possibly with local health departments. We would not be doing the sampling ourselves, but we try to put people in contact with each other so that sampling can occur. And then finally, between the two programs, we do a lot of health messaging. We do a lot of the fact sheets on health impacts of PFAS, go to public meetings and do other sorts of outreach relative to health impacts of PFAS.
So a little bit of background on DEEP's role with respect to PFAS. First, DEEP has two branches, environmental conservation and environmental quality. So on the environmental quality side of our house, we regulate discharges to the environment. We do that through the issuance of environmental permits that allow discharges to surface waters, groundwater, to air, and those permits generally set acceptable levels of pollutants to be emitted. If the registrant of the permit exceeds those discharge limits, we have inspection process and, of course, enforcement process to correct those issues. We conduct inspections and we regulate disposal of waste generally. On the pollution prevention front, our Bureau of Materials Management and Compliance Assurance is always looking for ways to prevent or minimize sources of pollution. Closer to the work that I do within the remediation division, we have remediation standard regulations, abbreviated RSRs. You'll hear that term coming up now and again as you participate in the various committees of the task force. So the RSRs set the standard for how clean is clean in soil, groundwater, surface water. We have pollution source oversight. We have the authority through statute to require environmental cleanup actions. We oversee those actions. We have the authority to compel actions under order. And we have a variety of environmental cleanup programs that would bring an environmental release into a cleanup program. We also have the authority to require the polluter to provide safe drinking water to those impacted by the source of pollution. And that could be anything from installation of filter systems to extension of water mains, or even short-term supply of bottled water.
So my name is Anna Hagstrom. I'm a postdoctoral fellow who's working in the Remediation division of DEEP, focusing on PFAS policy. So presenting a quick overview, what are PFAS? So PFAS is an acronym that stands for Per and Polyfluorinated Alkyl Substances. It's important to understand that PFAS is not a single chemical. This term refers to a class of over 4,000 different man-made chemicals. The first PFAS were developed in the late 1930s and early 1940s, and these chemicals have been widely used in consumer products and industrial processes ever since. PFAS all contain many carbon atoms bonded to fluorine atoms, and these carbon-fluorine bonds are incredibly strong. Thanks to this unique chemical composition, PFAS are highly stable, and they're able to repel oil, grease, water, and heat. As a result, PFAS are used in many products that we encounter on a daily basis, such as nonstick cookware, waterproof apparel, stain-resistant carpeting, and grease-resistant food packaging. Unfortunately, the same properties that make PFAS so useful also cause a host of problems. The carbon-fluorine bonds are so strong that PFAS cannot be broken down by natural processes. This is the reason why many of you might have heard PFAS referred to as forever chemicals. Once they get into our bodies or into the environment, they stay there for a long time. Many PFAS compounds bioaccumulate, meaning that they build up in the bodies of animals and humans. Unlike many other contaminants which tend to build up in fat, PFAS actually build up in protein. This is the reason why you might hear talk about concentrations in fish. When PFAS is present in fish, it's present in the fillets that we eat. And this is a problem because it's becoming increasingly clear that PFAS are linked to a host of health problems, which we'll cover in more detail later in the webinar. And finally, PFAS are able to migrate in both air and water, meaning that once they get into the environment, they spread. The two most well-known PFAS are perfluorooctanoic acid, which we'll refer to as PFOA, and perfluorooctane sulfonic acid, which we'll refer to as PFAS. So the chemical structures of both of these compounds are shown here. We're not going to belabor the chemistry, but I wanted to drive home a few points. So first of all PFAS contain two central components. They contain a chain of carbon atoms in which at least one carbon atom is fully surrounded by fluorine, which is shown here in green. Second, PFAS all contain a head group, such as the carboxylic and sulfonic acid head groups that are shown on the far right of each of these two structures. The names of all of these compounds provide us with a lot of information. The prefix per means that in these compounds, the carbon chains all have every carbon atom fully surrounded by fluorine. Oct means that these carbon chains each contain 8 carbon atoms, and sulf means that the carbon chain in PFAS ends in a sulfur atom, which is shown in yellow. In other PFAS, when the prefix poly is used instead of per, that tells us that not all of the atoms in the carbon chain are fully surrounded by fluorine. Perfluorinated PFAS do not break down, but in polyfluorinated PFAS, the carbon atoms that are not fully fluorinated serve as points of weakness where the compounds can break down. And often in the environment and in our bodies, polyfluorinated PFAS end up breaking down into shorter perfluorinated PFAS. And so while the head groups in PFAS compounds are water-soluble, the carbon-fluorine tails don't like to dissolve in either oil or water. And this is the reason why PFAS end up being so useful in non-stick, water-resistant, and stain-resistant coatings. And as a result, PFAS tend to migrate to the air-water interface, which is shown on this slide. This behavior also makes PFAS useful in firefighting foams, which we've all heard a lot about lately. Certain types of firefighting foams are made up of water containing high concentrations of PFAS. So when these foams are sprayed onto a fire, the PFAS migrate to the air-water interface and form a barrier that blocks out oxygen, which smothers and extinguishes the fire.
So Anna mentioned some of the characteristics that make PFAS a great product for many items in our daily use. such as rain gear, Teflon tubing, fabric softeners. It's also used in the manufacture of sailcloth. Very popular in cosmetics, including sunscreens. It's also a coating in popcorn bags, used as a weatherproofing, waterproofing agent in our footwear. Also an additive in paint. You can find it, of course, in the nonstick cookware, as a coating on pizza boxes. The list just seems to go on and on. It also is used in the process of metal plating, other industry as well. Most notably, I mentioned the pizza boxes, so other cardboard and papers that are treated with a grease-resistant or heat-resistant coating typically contain the PFAS. Anna also mentioned the AFFF foam. The photo in the lower right shows some firefighters applying that foam, and that's specific for the most part to fuel oils and other flammable liquids. We also find PFAS in waxes and other coatings in car washes to treat the paint finish. So places where we might find PFAS, certainly in municipal solid waste landfills. With all the consumer products that contain PFAS, it's just natural that we're going to find PFAS leaching out of landfill waste into leachate, of course contaminating groundwater and surface water bodies. I mentioned a number of industry uses for PFAS, as well as the AFFF foam for firefighting. We're finding PFAS present in the influent and effluent of wastewater treatment plants, including the biosolids that accumulate in these treatment plants. The lower center photo shows two vehicles depositing biosolids on an agricultural field. Now, that's not an activity, by and large, that doesn't really occur within Connecticut. Connecticut's biosolids are incinerated for the most part. That doesn't mean that we have a few locations that are bringing in biosolids from out of state, or one or two locations within the state that may not be incinerating their solids. And I've also mentioned that PFAS is also present in car washes and the paint coating protection system.
So when the sources that Ray just overviewed introduce PFAS into the environment, the PFAS are able to travel and spread through a number of different pathways, which are overviewed in this schematic. So when PFAS are released to air, either through industrial processes or through other processes, some settle onto the ground nearby and others travel longer distances. Since PFAS dissolve in water, their travel also follows along with the water cycle. So they can absorb into water droplets and clouds and reach the ground as rain. And when PFAS reach the ground, whether through air deposition, use of firefighting foam, or other sorts of industrial releases, they end up dissolving into groundwater and thereafter spreading in all directions. This obviously becomes a problem when there are nearby drinking water wells. So PFAS can also reach surface water either through the groundwater that feeds that water body or through surface water runoff.
Hello, my name is Cheryl Fields. I'm a toxicologist in the Department of Public Health, and I'm going to talk briefly about some of the problems caused by PFAS. As discussed earlier by Ray and Anna, PFAS is not a single chemical. It's a group of more than 4,000 related substances. However, only a few dozen of these chemicals have been studied, and the available data indicate that the two most well-studied compounds, PFOA and PFAS, appear to be the most toxic. Our understanding of the potential health effects for PFAS is based largely on findings and studies of laboratory animals. These studies have shown a variety of health effects in multiple species and strains following exposures at different life stages, from development before birth and all the way to and through adulthood. Of course, there can be no risk to health without exposure. In studies from around the world, PFAS have been identified in human blood serum in nearly every person that has been tested. This should come as no surprise given the long-term widespread use of PFAS in numerous consumer products, its persistence in the environment, and finding that it's now ubiquitous throughout our environment, including the water supplies around the world and in the United States. More recently, PFAS have been identified in our food supply, in seafood, meat, dairy products, and eggs. And while the two most toxic compounds, PFOA and PFAS, have been voluntarily phased out by the major manufacturers in the United States, they are still being produced overseas, so people may continue to have some exposure to these compounds, in addition to being exposed to their replacement PFAS. The replacement PFAS, Gen X and PFBS, seem to be less toxic. However, we've only studied them for a short time. As mentioned earlier, our understanding about the potential health effects for PFAS is based largely on findings in laboratory animal studies, and these have shown a variety of health effects. The most sensitive health effects, and by that I mean harmful effects that occur at the lowest doses of exposure, are developmental effects, and these include findings of low birth weight and delayed and accelerated puberty, and reduced immune system function, where animals showed a reduced response to vaccinations. At higher doses, PFAS exposure causes changes in the liver, kidney, and thyroid, disturbs natural hormones and lipids such as cholesterol, and causes cancer. Liver, testicular, and pancreatic cancer have been observed in rodent studies. Now, what about humans? The science linking PFAS exposures with human health effects is still evolving. We do have some human data, and for the most part, the human data generally supports the findings in animal studies. Some, but not all, studies in humans exposed to elevated levels of PFAS have shown that certain PFAS may decrease antibody responses to vaccinations, affect growth, learning, and behavior of infants and older children, interfere with the body's natural hormones and lipids, such as cholesterol, and at very high levels of exposure, a few studies have found increased risks of certain types of cancer, such as testicular and kidney cancers. Researchers are still evaluating the scientific data to better understand the differences and similarities between how animals and humans respond to PFAS. Now, you may be wondering, how does the dose, meaning the blood serum level, that is associated with the most sensitive outcome in animals compare to the blood PFAS levels seen in humans? This slide gives some perspective on the ranges of PFOA, blood serum levels, across the three main sources of human data that have been evaluated to understand the possible human health effects of PFAS. That is, highly exposed workers, studies of communities exposed to PFOA-contaminated drinking water, and studies of the general population. As you can see, blood levels of PFOA vary more than 2 orders of magnitude across these populations. The highest levels being seen in the occupationally exposed workers, where average PFAS levels were around 1,000 micrograms per liter. And the lowest levels are seen in the general population, where PFOA levels are less than 2 micrograms per liter. So to answer the question, how do animal doses compare with humans? In animal studies, the lowest PFOA blood serum level associated with developmental deficits in mice was a maternal blood serum level of 38,000 micrograms per liter. So much, much higher than the level seen in workers. And although human exposure is much lower than that seen in animals, we do appear to be more sensitive to the effects of PFAS and PFOA in particular. One of the most highly exposed communities in the United States is Little Hocking, and you can see the levels of Little Hocking in the third row in this slide. That community participated in one of the largest epidemiological studies of PFAS to date, known as the C8 study, which evaluated health effects in communities of nearly 70,000 women, men, and children who'd consumed PFOA-contaminated water in their drinking water for over 50 years. Researchers examined the probable link between PFOA exposure and any human disease. And by probable link, I mean that among the study participants, they were looking for a connection that existed between PFOA exposure and a particular human disease. And that study did find some probable links between PFOA exposure and a handful of diseases. These included high cholesterol, thyroid disease, pregnancy-induced hypertension and preeclampsia, a type of autoimmune disease, and kidney and testicular cancer. So how do we take what we know from animal and human studies and turn that information into drinking water guidelines that are protective of human health? All of the states in the EPA use a standardized process referred to as risk assessment. This process involves multiple steps and uses science-based professional judgment to determine a toxicity value. For example, the EPA's reference dose for PFOA of 0.00002 milligrams per kilogram of body weight per day. The goal is to identify a number that can be used as the basis for toxicologists to determine how much exposure of a substance is unlikely to result in an unacceptable risk of developing health effects over a defined period of time, typically a lifetime. Toxicity values are based on a critical study of studies, and we go through a number of steps in this process to develop this value, and that is including identifying the most sensitive adverse effect in laboratory animals and the dose associated with that effect, and then applying safety factors, which include accounting for uncertainties related to the variability among humans and the potential differences between humans and animals. Once we have our toxicity value, we make additional decisions to get to a drinking water level to be used as a guideline to protect human health. For example, the EPA's lifetime health advisory of 70 parts per trillion. These decisions involved in determining a drinking water level include determining the water ingestion rate for a target population. For example, if the substance is believed to be more harmful to children than adults, it would be important to use a child exposure scenario to protect the target population. So ultimately, through this standardized process, we're able to translate an internal dose, milligrams per kilograms of body weight per day, into a concentration in drinking water in micrograms per liter or parts per trillion. Nanograms per liter or parts per trillion that is intended to be protective against all health effects over a lifetime of exposure.
So EPA action on PFAS, if I could summarize this slide in a few words, I would say that EPA's lack of leadership on this front is forcing the individual states to take action, and that is what Connecticut is doing now. Other states around us, especially in the New England region here, have unfortunately experienced some substantial impacts due to PFAS, namely through the manufacturer of, actually the PFAS manufacturers themselves have caused some airborne emissions of PFAS that have condensed or otherwise fallen out around the communities that they're within and have caused some impacts to drinking water. Thankfully, we have not seen that in Connecticut, at least as of yet. Okay, so this next slide depicts the range of drinking water guidelines proposed by different states in the Northeast. In the absence of a federally enforceable drinking water guideline to PFAS, individual states, as Ray mentioned, have been conducting their own risk assessments to determine health protective guidelines. As data on PFAS exposure and toxicity continue to emerge, the science is changing so fast that states and agencies are working fastidiously to revise and develop their guidelines accordingly. For example, the state of New Hampshire presented new drinking water guidelines for PFAS in January of this year and has already revised those guidelines in the last month. PFAS challenges. Slide, please.
So this is Pat Bizzacki on with the drinking water section, and I've been the PFAS team lead. There are some unique PFAS management challenges. It's something that we're not used to dealing with. For public drinking water, there are no Safe Drinking Water Act enforceable standards. Sampling for drinking water is a challenge, and treatment options are limited and they're very expensive. For health standards, as Cheryl was mentioning, published research into health effects is moving faster than the government can act. And for remediation,
this is Ray. There's no EPA lab methods other than testing PFAS in drinking water. So we don't have a methodology at the moment for soil or other solid materials. There are modified methods that are being used. The analysis at this point in time is on the expensive side. and it's a little challenging to actually find a laboratory in the state that can actually do the PFAS analysis. The cost range that we're finding is in the $250 to $400 price range for one sample. And with cleanup options being limited at this point in time, it's certainly making PFAS a unique challenge for our state.
So in studies of any contaminant, it's helpful for different labs to use the same standardized methods. And to support these efforts, the EPA regularly validates and publishes lab methods for measuring the concentrations of a wide variety of different compounds in different types of samples. So in the case of PFAS, which are especially tricky to measure, this process has proven to be slow and it's presented a major roadblock. EPA-validated methods for PFAS analysis in potable water or drinking water have been around since 2009, when Method 537 Revision 1.1 was first published. This method concentrates samples using solid phase extraction and then measures the concentrations of 14 different PFAS compounds using liquid chromatography with tandem mass spectrometry, or LC-MS-MS. In November of 2018, this method was updated to Method 537.1, which has lower detection limits and measures 4 additional PFAS, including the replacement chemical known as GenX. This is really helpful because the more information we have about the specific PFAS that are present at a given site, the more information we have about the PFAS sources that are potentially at play. So at this point, 4 commercial labs have been approved by DPH to perform Method 537.1. And as Ray said, costs for this method typically range from $250 to $400 per sample. However, we expect this cost to come down as more labs are approved. In June of 2019, the EPA published Draft Method 8327, which can be used for non-potable water, such as surface water. So this method uses direct injection instead of solid phase extraction and measures 24 PFAS compounds. There has been some concern that detection limits are a bit higher than they are for the potable water methods. And this draft method is still in the public comment phase, which will run until late August. At present, there are still no EPA-validated methods for measuring PFAS concentrations in solid samples, such as soil or biosolids, which presents a significant challenge. Many labs do analyze solid samples and surface water samples right now using modified versions of Method 537.1 that incorporate isotope dilution, but there's no standardized process from lab to lab. We are hopeful that methods for solid samples will be published within the next year. And finally, since we know that PFAS are also able to travel in air and that stack emissions can present a significant PFAS source, it's also crucial for the EPA to publish methods for measuring PFAS concentrations in air. Unfortunately, at present, we don't have any indications that this is going to happen in the near future.
So for potable water sample collection, it's very challenging because of all of the consumer products that you use on yourself every day. There's a high potential for cross-contamination, and so if you're collecting multiple samples at a site, you should be collecting the PFAS samples first. Sample containers are provided by the laboratory. They need to be PFAS-free. Their caps need to be PFAS-free. The sealed plastic bags are also provided by the laboratory, as are the field reagent blanks, which contain PFAS-free water. When sampling, if your results indicate that you have PFAS in the water, it's highly recommended that you go out and collect second samples to confirm those results. Some of the major precautions, and when we're talking to labs, these are the things that they see most often happen when there's a cross-contamination in sample. Fabrics in vehicles contain PFAS, and many times a sampler will use the trunk of their car as a lab bench. You really can't contact anything with the materials in the car. If you have a cooler, and you do because you have to keep the samples cold in ice, don't bring them into the facility where you're collecting the samples, because the reason you're collecting samples is because there may be PFAS there already. The zippered bags that the PFAS samples are put into. Should not be placed onto any carpeting or anything that's fabric coated because of the potential for PFAS to be applied to those surfaces. Wearing breathable fabrics. You'll have all your sample collection bottles and everything close to your body, so breathable fabrics are particularly troublesome when it comes to collecting samples. And also the labels. The labels that the lab provides to you are PFAS-free, and they're also waterproof.
This is Joseph Bueller, a sanitary engineer with the Connecticut Department of Public Health, and I'm going to be talking about drinking water treatment options for PFAS. So what we know so far is conventional treatment methods are mostly ineffective, and by conventional treatment, I'm talking about surface water treatment plants for public water systems. Type of processes are clarification, filtration, and disinfection. Other processes that don't work so well is oxidation methods, such as chlorine, potassium permanganate, and ozone. And in fact, biodegradation processes can actually increase the concentration of PFAS in your water. Some established methods for treatment is reverse osmosis filtration. This can be extremely effective at removing PFAS, both long and short chain PFAS, but the high energy usage and operating costs can make it challenging for a regular method of treatment. You also have to worry about the concentrated solution, the retentate coming off the membrane, that would have to be disposed of. One very common method for treatment for PFAS is granular activated carbon, or GAC. The material for this can be either coal or coconut based. This tends to be more effective at removing long chain PFAS versus short chain. And same with RO is the material would have to be disposed of with the concentrated PFAS on it. Some research into the cost of these types of systems can range anywhere between thousands of dollars to tens of millions of dollars, with operating and maintenance costs associated with them as well. These cost variances can be influenced by the amount of water you're treating, in other words, your flow, the water quality characteristics, concentrations and types of PFAS you're treating for, other contaminant treatment processes that you may have to deal with, and if you had to make building upgrades or alterations, could affect the cost of your project. Finally, we'll talk about ion exchange. Ion exchange is kind of a competitor with GAC at the moment. It requires less contact time, so systems like this can take up less space than GAC, but the resin can end up being more expensive than carbon materials. One thing to point out is the ion exchange can be more effective at taking out smaller chain PFAS because the resins can be selective for those types of contaminants. So in the end, when you do a cost analysis with lifetime costs, GAC and ion exchange are actually fairly comparable and will balance out. One thing to mention is ion exchange resins are starting to be developed to be regenerative, so they could be backwashed and reuse the same resins. A couple of main takeaways for this slide is it's important to conduct pilot testing and water quality sampling to determine the best method for your specific system. Finally, I want to talk about point of entry and point of use treatment. So point of entry is treating an entire facility or building where the water's coming in at the entry point, and point of use is a select source treatment, such as a kitchen sink. Some effective methods, actually very effective methods for this, is reverse osmosis and GAC. These can be small filter units, and I want to point out that RO is best for your point of use systems, and GAC is more effective for a point of entry system. Some really important points on this is to consult local health for permits required for your wastewater streams if you're backwashing. And you want to consult the treatment professional on these treatment systems. Make sure you got the right system set up for your specific needs. You can go to the NSF website, and they maintain a list of certified PFAS filters. And you can always contact the State Department of Public Health for more info on POE, POU systems.
So remediating PFAS-contaminated soil. There's a couple of options. Most commonly used right now is just straight up excavation and disposal. Capping is another option to environmentally isolate the impacted soils by placing it beneath a flexible membrane liner or a clay layer or a combination of the two, again, to make that impacted soil environmentally isolated so that rainwater and snowmelt cannot infiltrate through the impacted soil and carry the contaminant down to the water table. There's also sorption, stabilization options coming online. These options do not destroy the contaminant, they merely bind the contaminant within the media. Thermal treatment is something that we're looking forward to having online sooner rather than later. At the moment, there is no thermal treatment facility that we are aware of within the United States. There may be one in Canada that we're going to be evaluating, but the key here is that a minimum of 1,000 degrees Celsius is needed to break down PFAS, to mineralize PFAS. Otherwise, with a lower temperature, we're going to run the risk of having PFAS be liberated from the impacted media that's being treated and going out into the emissions from the treatment facility and condensing on the neighborhood around it. And we certainly do not want that. PFAS situation in Connecticut.
So this is Lori from the Department of Public Health. Between Ray and I, we're going to share the slide and go back and forth a little bit. At the beginning of time for the state of Connecticut, really was when EPA mandated the testing of all the large public water systems under what is known as the UCMR3, the Unregulated Contaminant Rule, third round. There were no PFAS detects reported from 2013 to 2015 under that testing, that occurrence testing that happens across the country. So however, as Ray had mentioned and others had mentioned, around us, there were detects under that UCMR testing that happened. And in New England, New York, New Jersey, it was found in a variety of different areas. And because of that, EPA came out with a health advisory in June or July of 2016. And then following that, the Department of Public Health, through Brian Toll's group in toxicology, environmental health, set a Connecticut Department of Public Health drinking water action level at the end of 2016.
In 2017, there was contamination detected from an airport in Westchester County, New York. And there was some testing and public outreach that occurred between 17 and 18. 18 is really where we're starting to pick up knowledge, at least within DEEP, of PFAS contamination within the state. We detected PFAS contamination in soil and groundwater at the Willimantic Fire Training Facility operated by DESPI. One home was impacted, the drinking water well was impacted with PFAS, and thankfully that's been rectified with the extension of a public water main. Also, DEEP and Department of Emergency Services and Public Protection formed a committee to evaluate alternatives to the AFFF firefighting foam to see if there's some other foam product that is acceptable for use and acts and behaves as AFFF behaves to the benefit of putting out a fire. Also, DEEP is, in 2019, DEEP has initiated some evaluation of environmental media around landfills that DEEP is managing. We manage 5 landfills that were formerly operated by the Connecticut Resource Recovery Authority, and that entity is now known as MIRA. We have started to look, and no big surprises, we are finding it. Also, this year, DEEP and DESPI issued a bulletin on the use of AFFF. And to paraphrase that bulletin, it's use it if you need to save a life. We certainly don't want to, that's first and foremost, saving a life. But once AFFF has been deployed, do your best to try to corral that material and scrape it up so that we don't have residual contamination. We also had the AFFF foam release from an accidental release at a hangar at the Bradley Airport campus. We actually, in all honesty, were not anticipating a release to surface water. From DEEP's perspective, we were anticipating a release to groundwater. So this one kind of caught us off guard a bit. Evaluating surface water, we had to figure out which analyses to run, what's the comparison, what's the impact to fish tissue and sampling of fish tissue. So these issues have been brought to the forefront within DEEP and DPH very recently.
So one thing I wanted to step a little bit back and give our colleagues in New York an enormous amount of credit. The Department of Health out of Albany in New York had contacted our department at the tail end of 2017, and as Ray had mentioned, had alerted both agencies of the contamination right on the border with Greenwich. And I wanted to highlight the work, and we'll talk a little bit more about this in a bit, of the testing and public outreach that took place in the year 2018 with Greenwich and the local health department led by Caroline Baisley, the local health director for the town of Greenwich. And that really was our first foray into PFAS within the drinking water section within the Department of Public Health, working with our partners at DEEP as well as environmental health and our toxicologists, and holding a very unique forum in May of 2018. Significant in 2018 also was the Department of Public Health within my section, the drinking water section, is requiring a land use risk assessment by our larger water systems that serve over 1,000 people, and again, there's 80 of those that conduct, that produce water supply plans, and a piece of that is a land use risk assessment. Those assessments were required because we wanted to work with our larger systems about the risks that are around them. We work carefully and closely with the Connecticut section of AWWA and a form and format and a process for those to come into us, and we are starting to receive those now at this moment in time. And further, moving forward in the year 2019, under our section, who is responsible for reviewing and approving new sources of public drinking water, we have required every new source at the tail end of 2018 into the year 19, are requiring any new public water supply source to be tested for PFAS moving forward.
So actions that DEEP is taking. So we're trying to identify the possible sites. We know through the use of AFFF, either through training purposes or through deployment of that material to address an emergency, AFFF releases are certainly a potential site for us. Mentioned landfills, and we're also looking at the SIC codes for industries that would likely have PFAS within the manufacturing processes. For our cleanup criteria, we mentioned the RSRs, or Remediation Standard Regulations, previously. We do have soil and cleanup goals available. They are listed as additional polluting substances for those of you familiar with the RSRs. Coordination and outreach. We are speaking with the LEP community through the division's roundtables that we hold on a roughly quarterly basis. We are networking with regional and national work groups, and that has actually been a very beneficial process for us to be involved with. We've also initiated a conversation with UConn on methodologies to detect PFAS in the environment, and certainly some ongoing networking with DESPI, Emergency Services and Public Protection, specifically on the AFFF use and finding an alternative to that material. The remediation standard regulations, as I mentioned, PFAS is identified as an additional polluting substance, and we have criteria for for soil and drinking water. Alternatively, you can calculate a site-specific criteria using the formulas presented. So here are the additional polluting substance criteria for PFAS. They're relatively low criteria, are in line with the rather low criteria for drinking water. For significant environmental hazards, PFAS is a reportable situation where a drinking water well has been contaminated at any level of PFAS. That is reportable as a significant environmental hazard. So environmental professionals need to notify their client, property owner within 7 days, and making a report to DEEP within 30 days.
Excuse me, this is Pat again. Our Connecticut agency actions for DPH and drinking water, as Lori mentioned, we've been requiring the large public water systems to assess for PFAS risk. We require testing of all new public drinking water sources, which we approve for use. And we're encouraging testing at all sources that are providing water for human consumption to the public. The Public Health Laboratory has been assessing the feasibility for testing for PFAS, and our Environmental Health section has set drinking water action level for 5 PFAS. They prepare health messaging and fact sheets, and they provide outreach to private well owners and local health departments. The land use assessments, Lori talked about it a little bit. The highlights of this slide I would like to point out is we have the form here for you to see. It's also posted on our website so you can understand what the water systems are looking at when they're doing their land use assessments. And a great resource are the Interstate Technology Regulatory Council reference material. They're PFAS fact sheets. They have 6 of them. They're very informative, and they'll give you an even deeper dive into the material that we've been providing you today. Circular Letter 2018-19 is what the Department of Public Health Drinking Water section sent to all public water systems, directors of health, chief elected officials, and certified water system operators to let them know what we had been doing up until that point for PFAS. This is where we told them we are going to be asking all new public water system sources of supply to be testing for PFAS. Interagency collaboration. Is this you, Lori?
Yes, it is. Well, along with Ray. So information sharing. We both have very robust GIS systems, geographical information system mapping, and we share information and have done for decades. But when it comes to PFAS, we want to be able to share the information. When we have information for PFAS, we're sharing it back and forth between agencies. And within our section, there's drinking water, for public drinking water, for private wells. When we're knowledgeable about that information, we are sharing it between agencies.
For responses, both DEEP and DPH staff are trained in proper methodology for collecting drinking water samples for PFAS analysis. We responded to the situation that occurred just over the line from Greenwich, sampling a number of residential wells within our border. We're collaborating with other stakeholders on the contamination that was detected at the Willimantic Fire Training Facility. As far as...
one thing I wanted to mention, and what Ray had mentioned was very significant for all of us. A number of us have been involved with learning a lot about PFAS over the last couple of years in sitting in a number of national and regional calls, either through different associations, and I know that we spend an enormous amount of our time listening to what other states are doing and participating with and learning from other states in the situation. So in our section, in our group and health department have developed a team that work together on all of this, along with working with a team from DEP. So we've worked really hard on developing communication tools and web pages between our agencies, and now the new webpage, which we'll talk about a little bit further, and correspondence between our departments. We rely heavily and work heavily with our local health departments, and they are the lead community level risk communicators that are experts in risk communication. And just to say another word about local health is that while there are 74 of them in our state, each and every one of them is critical and mission critical to risk communication on PFAS moving forward, and has been and will continue to be our partners as we move through this process with PFAS. So as we mentioned, we want to share with you just a couple pictures here to display the work that has been done. The picture on the left is Caroline Baisley. She's the health director of the town of Greenwich. And the headline in the Greenwich Free Press was "Residents Ask Tough Questions on PFAS Contamination of Well Water." That was at a forum back in May of 2018, where ourselves, DEEP, worked with Caroline to set up this public community forum and answered an enormous amount of questions. We had over 100 people come and attend in Greenwich, a community forum within the area that was potentially contaminated, to answer questions. And it was well received and very well done, and to a lot of the credit goes to the health director, Caroline, and her team, who helped work to arrange all of what played out there in Greenwich. And in Windsor, you see a picture of over 150 people in the town of Windsor. You see to the right, there's a state representative, Garibay, and the town the town mayor, Mayor Trinks. And Ray, if you want to say a few words.
Yeah, I thought it was a very good forum to help spread information about PFAS, the nature of how that release occurred at the Bradley Airport facility, and how it made its way from that airport hangar over to the Farmington River. Again, I was just sharing the information, and of course getting into the environmental and health impacts. It was very beneficial to share that information.
So between Ray and I, we'll share this one as well. So the task force and the committee action. So why we're here doing all of this is that Governor Lamont, ordered the formation of a task force made up of state agencies on July 8th. The very first meeting was just last week, on Tuesday, July 30th. The very first meeting of the task force, and the establishment of 3 subcommittees.
And we're very thankful for those that were able to attend the first kickoff meeting, and doubly thankful for those of you that have signed up to participate in one of the 3 committees that both DEEP and DPH are chairing. We had intended to kick off the committee meetings next week. 2 of the meetings we plan to move forward with, and details will be coming out on the listserv, but I can tell you right now that we're planning for next Thursday and Friday. I believe that's the 15th and 16th, both occurring at 9 a.m. going to about noon at 79 Elm Street in Hartford. That's DEEP headquarters, and we will be meeting in the auditorium. The Thursday meeting will be on pollution prevention. The Friday meeting will be on remediation. And again, details of these 2 meetings will be coming out through the listserv.
And so the subcommittee that is chaired by myself and Brian Toll, the Department of Public Health, focusing on health, we are looking at dates to not interfere with those 2 that are set by DEEP, and more to come on our dates, but we're looking at the end of next week, if not the beginning of the following week.
So our second meeting of the task force, we anticipate having an initial report out from the committees. Committee action, again, occurring after the 28th, leading into September, where we should probably have our final report out during meeting 3, and submittal of the PFAS action plan on Governor Lamont's desk by October 1.
So there's been a joint effort between our two agencies under the governor's interagency task force to develop a website. And it's up and running, and as you can see the address here. This is one place that you can go to find all updated information and current information on meetings, meeting dates, meeting locations. You certainly also can sign up for the listserv, and Ray could tell you more about that.
If you go to the CT-PFAS webpage shown on the screen, you can click on the listserv button and go through the process there to sign up for all the meeting announcements. In addition to the information that is listed here, I'm going to share my phone number. If you happen to have an issue that cannot be addressed through this process, again, this is Ray Freegon, and my direct line is 860-424-3797.
And if you have any questions for the Department of Public Health on anything that you heard, I'll give you the drinking water section's general line, and you can ask for Pat Pisacki or myself, and that number is 860-509-7333 at the Department of Public Health. But there's an email address there to email any and all questions if you wish to email questions. But at this moment, I believe that we are at the point, and we're pretty much on time. We started a little late. But at this point, we have an opportunity over the next few moments, next 25 minutes or so, to answer your questions. So that we are opening that up at the moment to see what questions we have. We have some questions. So give us a little bit of time while we open up the questions.
Is the presentation going to be made available after the webinar?
Yes, we will publish that on the webpage that we just shared with you.
Yes, we'll have a link on the webpage.
Yes.
A great job, thank you. Oh, you're welcome.
You're welcome.
You're welcome, Mary.
Can glass sample jars be used to collect water samples?
And the answer to that would be no. The sample jars are provided by the lab, they're polypropylene, and they're certified PFAS-free.
All right. How was PFAS detected in soil in Willimantic if no reliable soil analytical method exists?
Well, that's a very good question. For starters, we know that the AFFF foam was dispensed routinely at that property. So we know we had a point of release. One of the modified methods, I believe, was used to evaluate the concentrations. Not an approved method, but at this point in time, it's a modified method.
Okay, good question. How are there NSF certified PFAS filters if there are not standard methods for PFAS measurement? That's an interesting question.
There are standard methods for PFAS measurement in potable water. So method 537 version 1.1 as well as method 537.1.
All right. This is seems like a comment. Let's see. One of the best.
Go ahead and read it.
Okay, one of the best ways to identify exposure is the concentration of PFAS in the bloodstream. Will Connecticut DPH be conducting sampling on PFAS in blood of exposure to people before and after PFAS mitigation or remediation in order to determine if the mitigation or remediation has been effective?
Not likely. The best way to find out if mitigation is effective is to test the water. If we test somebody's blood after they've been drinking the water for a long period of time, we know their blood is going to be high. It can take years for the blood levels to decrease after the water has been remediated. So using the blood as a surrogate for water remediation is not a good way to determine if remediation is effective.
Okay, thank you, Brian.
Here's another question. If PFAS is in biosolids and most biosolids in Connecticut are incinerated, where does the PFAS end up? Is it scrubbed out of the flue gas? Has it been detected in incinerator flue gas after scrubbing? First, if the sludge is being incinerated above 1,000 degrees Celsius, then an assumption is being made that the PFAS has been mineralized and destroyed. If the temperature within the incinerator is not at 1,000 degrees Celsius, it's below that, I suspect we're getting some PFAS exiting out with the flue gases. Now, this is a topic that we will be addressing in the Remediation Committee.
All right. I think that's all our questions for this webinar.
Go to the bottom and see
So
if any
let's-
more
yeah,
come up.
see if
We're
any-
checking to make sure that we
wanna
got
get
all the
everybody-
questions.
Okay, there's one more.
There's more.
Okay, let me.
All right, give us a little bit of time. We're trying to capture all of the questions that we have.
And let's see. Let's make sure
All right, go ahead.
make sure I started where we
Great job, thank you.
glass. Yes. Okay. So here we go. What are the plans to test existing public water supplies?
That's a very good question. One of the things, as Ray mentioned, there are things here that we are going to be taking up and talking about further under the subcommittees. So there is more to come on what are the plans of testing existing public water systems.
Yeah,
Very good question.
That topic will also be coming up in the Remediation Committee.
Okay. What were the dates again for the work group meeting next week?
Let's see, Thursday and Friday of next week, 15th and 16th, 9 a.m. to noon, both dates. The 15th topic is pollution prevention. Friday's topic is remediation. And again, these will be provided to all those that have signed up for listserv, and we'll also post the dates on the webpage, project webpage.
And so for the third committee, the health committee, we have yet to set a date, but we are looking at either Thursday of next week or Friday in the afternoon to not conflict with the two that Ray mentioned.
Okay, here's a question about thermal treatment. Is it the only method to completely break down PFAS in terms of remediation? Also, is there a reason why no facilities are in the U.S.?
Another great question.
There are some emerging methods that researchers are working with on a bench scale, such as use of plasma treatment to break down these compounds. But that is still at early stages and something that people are looking at to see if it's feasible to scale up.
And as far as thermal, there is no approved methodology for testing PFAS in air at the moment. Hopefully a modified method is out there. Again, another topic that will be discussed at length in the Remediation Committee.
And are there facilities in the U.S.?
No.
No facilities.
No, so we're hoping this process will definitely be expedited once the EPA puts out validated methods for PFAS measurements in air.
Since there are many states working independently of the EPA, do you foresee joining forces with the EPA and other states in the future in order to implement federal policies for all states?
Well, Lori, I'll talk a little bit on the drinking water side. We have been working with other states, working across state lines, our colleagues in New England for certain, as well as colleagues in the drinking water administrators across the country. The Association of State Drinking Water Administrators has been working diligently across the country with states on the drinking water items because of the lack of leadership by EPA in this area. We do, when we say EPA is lacking leadership, it doesn't mean that they're not doing nothing. EPA does have an action plan. They do plan a number of actions under that action plan, but in many situations and circumstances, they're not moving fast enough. But we do still work with EPA. You know, EPA provides to us federal grant funding, and we do know our colleagues out of Region 1 in Boston, as well as our colleagues from EPA in headquarters out of Washington, D.C. So there is a lot of discussion going on. That's why we know what we know and the information that we provide. But we also know in the discussions we have with EPA that we find it to be very disappointing that the leadership is not being provided fast enough and soon enough. So while you might think the states could get together and form a collaborative, well, we sort of are, but it's very difficult because other states, under their state legislatures, are being mandated to set MCLs for maximum contaminant levels for drinking water, for instance, where the states are under different time frames, and because they're under different state laws and different mandates. So that's where you sort of see states taking their own action, is that through their state governments, have been mandating under state law with very little EPA guidance and leadership.
And on DEEP's end, we also do regularly participate in EPA-organized phone calls with the other states in Region 1. So we talk to our counterpart departments as well as EPA, and we give updates on all of our actions, and the EPA gives us updates on their work, such as their method development.
So we have a question on public outreach and communication. Can we comment on the efforts being made to address those concerns?
So is this the next question here?
Yep.
So some of the comments: needs to be a parallel effort on public outreach and communication that spans the efforts of all three subcommittees. One of the things that Ray and I can address that, one of the things, our mandates within each one of the committees is to focus in on communication, risk communication, public outreach, and education. Every one of the committees, you'll see that as between ourselves, DEEP, and our colleagues leading the subcommittees, will be focusing in on the need for public outreach and communication. As we heard that loud and clear last week at the very first task force meeting, when there were questions, there were a number of questions focused on this, and it's a very good question to be placed here because we heard that loud and clear, and we are taking that as a very serious matter. Within every one of the committees, we will have time for discussion on that very point.
Absolutely. Yep. Our commissioners of DEEP and DPH agreed that, again, this was a very serious topic, and to give it the attention that it deserves, that all three committees should address communication.
All right, here's a question on standards. It's one of the goals of the task force to recommend an MCL, and is the task force expected to recommend a PFAS MCL?
So that's a very good question, Ray. I appreciate that. That can be part of the discussion. It's one of the things that one of the items, very important items, that the Department of Public Health has been reviewing internally for a bit of time, and where we had versus the health advisory that we have at this moment in time versus setting a maximum contaminant level. I don't have a direct answer for you, but that's something for discussion. We certainly are paying close, as Anna mentioned, we certainly pay close attention, along with DEEP and our colleagues at DEEP, on many, many calls, listening to what the states of New Hampshire, Vermont, Massachusetts, and New York in particular have done recently. As Cheryl Fields had mentioned about New Hampshire specifically, my counterpart, Sarah Pillsbury, New Hampshire, we talk quite often, and we get a good understanding of their level of detail and what they've gone through to set their state MCLs. And it's a significant body of work to move that forward. And that's something that we have under consideration at this moment in time. And will be part of the discussion when we have the discussions for the subcommittee on health.
All right, and a question on sampling. Will Connecticut be conducting background study of PFAS in groundwater and surface water?
Absolutely, we need to do that. When we had the foam release in the Farmington, what we didn't have before that was knowledge of what the background PFAS concentrations are in the river. So part of the remediation committee will be to evaluate where do we want to be sampling throughout the state. Do we want to focus on specific areas to get maybe more pristine areas to determine what background levels really are.
Okay, so thank you, Ray. We have a question pointing out that PFAS has been around 60, 70 years. What changed that we're just now finding out about these dangers? And also, do we know whether a cause of cancer can be 100% based on PFAS, or could there be another cause?
I think one thing I'll take the what's changed a little bit, and then Cheryl, you can answer the rest of most of it. But what's changed with PFAS, and I just want to point out something that we made, I hopefully very clear, was that in the year 2013 to 15, EPA started the process of testing for occurrence data. Before that, the Department of Public Health, and we did not have any information on PFAS. We're not, as you know, we don't regulate them at all at this moment in time. There is no course set by EPA for an MCL, and they're just starting to think about it. So really our process started within the Department of Public Health drinking water section and the environmental section, looking at PFAS when the occurrence data started to come out, and what was found around us in New England started to become more widely known. And again, that was only starting in the year 2013. So Cheryl.
Yes, this is Cheryl Fields. So in respect to what changed since it's been used in the last 60 to 70 years, initially when PFAS was being produced, the producers did not actually recognize that there was exposure occurring in those worker populations. Studies that documented the first exposure didn't occur until the 1970s. And then the question whether or not those exposures had any meaningful health effects was not very clear. These were small worker populations. They tend to be healthy. So it was difficult to see any meaningful associations. But that was the first red flag in the 1970s in terms of health effects. And the epidemiological studies evolved slowly over time because humans aren't lab animals. We have multiple exposures. As the question alludes to the fact, is there a way to understand the cause of cancer to be 100% based on PFAS? And the answer is absolutely not. It would be impossible rarely for any study to see a clear association between exposure and the cancer risk, because we're exposed to multiple carcinogens on a daily basis in our diet from ingesting charred boiled meat. Some of us may be smokers or drinkers. And if you know anything about the history of epidemiology, it took over 100 years to definitively say that smoking cigarettes causes lung cancer in addition to other cancers. So that's part of what this process is. It takes time. We began to look at animal data. We discovered there were meaningful health effects and they were consistent across animals. And now we're looking in humans. And that data is evolving and it's a process.
Thank you, Cheryl. All right, and our next question is the current Significant Environmental Hazard Law, 22A6U, doesn't list PFAS and PFOA. Are changes to the regulation envisioned?
Changes could be made arising out of the remediation committee. That's certainly a possibility. At the moment, it would be reportable as contamination in a drinking water well, one of the provisions under 6U.
All right, thank you, Ray. How is waste generally disposed of when using GAC, ion exchange, and membranes? That's a good question. So generally, I didn't get into how long the carbon lasts, but there were studies showing a half a year to 3 years, depending on how much is there. But disposing of it would have to
Hazardous waste.
Yeah.
Yes,
So
waste.
people were pointing around.
Yep.
Sorry. So you'd have to remove the waste, and then of course Ray would.
I mean, it's not
know where it's going.
designated. PFAS, it does not have a hazardous designation at this point in time, but all indications, and the prudent thing to do, and what we're aware of is happening, is that it's being treated as a hazardous waste.
Mm-hmm. Okay, thanks, Ray. All right, testing of existing public and water supplies.
So Lori, we mentioned a little bit about that, or a lot about that, and it's going to be taken up at the under the health committee, also probably the other committee that Ray mentioned. There will be some discussion of that, and one of the efforts that in the drinking water section, certainly, as you can probably tell, testing is probably going to be moving forward for all of those public water systems. And as you know, you think about the map that we shared, you think about the numbers that we shared, there's 2,500 public water systems. There's 2,000 of those are non-community systems. Those are those wells, those little dots on the map all throughout Connecticut in the more rural areas in our state. Those are small systems serving, could be serving larger populations, such as, restaurant or what have you. So there's a lot to do there. There's a lot of thinking to do. And one of the discussion points, this will be one of the discussion points in the health committee.
All right, so we got 5 minutes left. We'll try to get to as many questions as we can. If we didn't get to you, like I said before, you can email those questions to the PFAS website email address on the previous slide. So although states are moving forward with their own standards, it is my understanding that EPA is in the process of developing standards. Do you think EPA will be developing these standards soon? And in addition, Congress is considering several amendments to address PFAS. To what extent are you working with federal developments?
So thank you, Betsy. It's a good question. We are, as we mentioned previously, working carefully and closely with our partners at EPA. We understand that even if they decided today to set an MCL for all PFAS compounds, it would take years to move forward. I think at this moment in time, do you think EPA will develop their standards soon? No, I don't believe that is the case. And the people that I talk to at headquarters as well as in Boston, that is not going to happen in the next couple of years. They are moving forward, but it is a slow pace. Given what's going on, we are going to look at it individually as a state of Connecticut under this task force.
And we're certainly aware that Congress is considering amendments. So right now, the National Defense Authorization Act, the versions proposed by both the House and Senate do contain provisions relating to PFAS. So we are following that closely, and we'll be interested to see what happens when the two chambers consolidate those pieces of legislation.
Okay. Oh, okay. Has DPH and DEP advised other state agencies to discontinue use of PFAS compounds?
That's something that we envision arising out of the work of the three committees, and will be written into the action plan that gets presented to the governor. For the moment, the use of the AFFF foam is the most predominant use. And we have, as I mentioned earlier, the working document between DESP and DEEP to local fire officials on the use of AFFF.
All right, thank you. If DPH will not measure blood PFAS concentrations at the St. Germain site, how do you know that the mitigation or remediation performed is actually reducing human health exposure?
As you said, there are a host of potential exposure routes, so will remediation of soil and groundwater actually make measurable impact on human exposure?
Yeah, I mean, the primary route of exposure in the St. Cobain, Vermont situation was the drinking water. measuring blood. They did measure blood there. They had special funding to do that measurement. However, the primary way to decide if the mitigation is effective is to test the water. If soil or other sources are significantly contaminated in an area, then testing of that soil after mitigation would be the best way to decide if mitigation is effective. Testing of blood, again, given the years and years it will take for blood to clear, would not be a good way to determine the success of mitigation.
So we are just at 3 o'clock, just about, but we have 6 or 7 more questions. If you're willing to stay on, we're willing to stay on and answer the questions that we have in front of us. So we have 6 or 7 more to get through, and we will stay on maybe for another few minutes while we answer these, maybe another 5 or 7 minutes. So the next question, Joe, is?
Another question about PFAS limits, and this is directed towards drinking water or wastewater facilities.
And again, it's the same, similar answer. The health committee and the prevention committees will be discussing this, but there certainly has been and will be consideration of moving forward with limits.
Okay, given what is known about PFAS in consumer products, have manufacturing processes been changing to use alternatives to known problematic compounds such as PFAS and PFOA?
Yes. So PFAS and PFOA specifically were voluntarily phased out earlier, starting in the early 2000s. There are now replacement compounds that are used in their place. These are typically shorter chain compounds that are thought to have fewer negative health impacts, but we are still in the process of evaluating that. We're certainly aware that some of these shorter chain compounds cause similar problems as their longer chain legacy predecessors.
Okay, thank you. This will wind up being an expensive process. How will the efforts be funded?
Well, I think overall, just this, I would say drinking water, as well as all the other items that we've been talking about, there is an economic impact, and that's something that should be brought up during the subcommittees, I'm sure.
Absolutely. If the committees are making a recommendation, we need to consider what resources, whether they be staff resources within the state agencies or resources that could be brought in from consulting firms, and likewise financial resources, what's going to be necessary to pull off all the things that are going to be presented in the state action plan.
Yeah, I'd like to speak on some funding options the state has to offer is the state revolving funds. There's the drinking water and clean water revolving funds where the state receives federal monies and can offer low interest long-term loans for drinking water and clean water projects.
And that could fund projects, as Joe mentioned, such as proposed treatment systems for PFAS. And again, it's not grant funding. In the case of the drinking water state revolving loan fund, it is a loan. It is a low interest loan over a period of 20 years, and it is loan funding. So, very good question.
What characteristics would make PFAS a hazardous waste?
Toxicity. It's bioaccumulator. It's relatively low toxicity.
Yeah, I mean, that's a regulatory decision. They're obviously fairly toxic compounds, and that's one of the big pushes at the national level is to get EPA to designate PFAS as a hazardous compound and a hazardous waste. There's an official list that currently is put out by EPA that determines somebody's on the list of hazardous materials. PFAS needs to get added to that list, and at this point, as far as I know, that's a federal process unless DEP takes up a different action on federal process.
And its persistence also factors into that consideration as well. So it's both toxic and persistent, does not break down.
Question.
Can you talk more about the use of GAC to filter water? What are some of the downsides of that approach? Okay, yeah, of course. So I could talk about either large scale or the small scale point of entry systems. The large scale systems, GAC is an adsorbent, so it's material that has a lot of porous area where the PFAS will adhere to or adsorb to that material. So some of the disadvantages of GAC is that it is most effective against long chain PFAS compounds such as the 8 or 9 chain PFOA or PFAS. And after a while, they can only treat so much because it will eventually get all used up. So you'll see breakthrough over time, and then it gets to the point where we have to dispose of it as a hazardous waste, as Ray mentioned. It can also be very expensive on a large scale. Like I said, some projects that we've seen in case studies go up to tens of millions of dollars, and they can take up a lot of space, requiring retrofitting buildings and that sort of thing. For the smaller point of entry systems, we have a private well program supervisor from public health here that can touch on that.
Hello, everybody. I'm Ryan Tatro, supervisor of the private well program. With respect to a residential application for a private well, in terms of downsides of GAC, some individuals might not have room to put it in their house, so they need to consider a smaller, compact use, like a point of use reverse osmosis at the kitchen sink. With any treatment technology, some of the downsides are the possible need for pre-treatment. Things like iron and manganese might cause fouling of the filter media, so you may need to install pre-treatment to make sure that the intended treatment system is going to work appropriately.
So, Brian, thank you. I believe that's the last question. Why don't we just double check to make sure?
Yep.
That is it. So, on behalf of the Department of Public Health, and DEP, and our commissioners,
yes.
Right, myself and
Ray Freegon,
right, and all the people in the room here. I want to say thank you for listening and participating. There was 101 of you out there listening to us today. We really appreciate your level of interest. Your time spent with us today, your great questions that you've provided to us. All of this will be provided to you on the web page that you saw. If we go back to the web page, go back to the previous slide.
Sure.
If everyone can see that, again, the Governor's Interagency PFAS Task Force, there's the website address, to stay informed, get on the listserv. You can find a listserv link on that web page. This presentation, this webinar will be shared on that web page. Again, emailing any questions to the email listed below. And we look forward to the upcoming meetings, which are happening quick. And thank you all for your time and effort and interest.
And the shortcut URL for the task force website is ct.gov/CTPFAS task force. So you don't have to type all of that.
So thank you very much.